first speaker is coming to you, I hope, not from here. He is from Australia. He's called John Hampton. Can we try and get the link up, please? And he's not actually in Australia. There's a little mix-up in communications. He is, in fact, in Spain. I discovered this because John claims he sent me an email. I don't think he did, but John insists that he sent me an email saying that he was in Spain. I got an email saying, I'm in Spain, but I'm coming to London. But maybe we'll put this down to confusion. Can you hear me, John?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I'd like to thank Mirada PLC, who thankfully are a television company, and they have offices in Spain. And at the last minute, they rallied round. So I've promised an extra bottle of Greek olive oil to Jose from Mirada, who has been a complete hero and was sending emails at 3 in the morning, London time, to make sure we could do this. John Hampton is the king of the bears right now. He is the big daddy of all bear raiders. My first experience, and I'm going to be nice to you, John. My first experience of John was when we were looking at a company called Cupid, which was, not to put too much finer point on it, a complete fraud. Cupid was a dating service, and the business model was that they would have a free website where dirty old men could go onto it, and they would get incredibly attractive women who claimed to live around the corner and wanted to have sex with them. And obviously this may happen to John all the time, but for the rest of us, life doesn't, not you're a dirty old man, John, for the rest of us, it doesn't happen like that. And all you had to do was to join the premium service and pay them lots of money. And as soon as you joined the premium service, the attractive young ladies who wanted to have sex with you disappeared. And you found that basically there were a couple of the sort of people who Wayne Rooney used to associate with, grandmothers from Liverpool, and it was all rather disappointing. That was the Cupid fraud. John Hampton signed up as a dirty old man and put a post about how he was, I think you were unemployed, you had gonorrhea, you lived in a council house, you had no prospects, all your teeth had fallen out, all your hair had fallen out, you had a problem with body odor, and generally, you weren't quite the biggest sex symbol. And amazingly, with this description, vast numbers of attractive young ladies just round the corner from John said they wanted to have sex with him. And all he had to do was pay to join the premium site. John's post on that was incredibly humorous. I haven't done it justice. But the reason that he's the king of the bears right now is he put out a report about some American company, and you wiped $20 billion off its market cap in 24 hours or something, John.
It was rather good. I should go back to the Cupid post. There were a couple of other things I did. Stosa Spur is the least populated Shetland island. It has a population of 8. Three of the population of 8 are women, and they're all on benaughty.com. They all want to have sex with their neighbours.
This is one of the things which I think is that bears not only do better homework when it comes to investigating stocks than the bulls. There are numerous buy notes you could have found on Cupid from the brokers. They hadn't actually bothered to go and pretend to have gonorrhea and live in a council flat and see how many women wanted to have sex with them. Bears tend to do a lot better homework than bulls. The other one is that I think the bears, because we are by nature quirky, tend to be funnier. So you're not only funny, but you're king of the bears, John. That's very good, but at the moment I'm going to tell you about a short hit piece that didn't work. Okay, over to you, just to show you're fallible. You are human.
Yeah, we put out short research reports and we do a lot of work. This is about a gold mining company in Canada called Pretium, which I was 99% sure was a fraud. In fact, I was 99.9% sure it was a fraud. And we did an enormous amount of work in order to try and put out the definitive hit piece. And the definitive hit piece was going to be really, really, really good. It just didn't work. Now, I want to throw up just a few of the slides. I've edited a large number of the slides, but the first slide I want to throw up is my disclaimer for non-lawyers. It's on the second slide in the short version. Do you have them there?
Yep, we've got it, John.
right? It's quite blunt. If you do what I say, you'll lose money. If you do this much research, you can work really, really, really hard and still fail. I'm not going to discourage you. It's actually quite a lot of fun failing this way, but you really don't want to do it. Now, it goes back to, there are a lot of gold bugs in your room there. And instinctively, I'd like to be a gold bug too. But, you know, buying gold mines is sometimes like getting married a fourth time. It's a triumphant hope-over experience. And there's a Mark Twain statement about what a gold mine is, a picture on the next slide, which is that a gold mine is a hole in the ground with a liar on top. And for every real gold mine that has been found and listed on the AIM stock market or the Vancouver Stock Exchange or the Toronto Venture Board, there's probably about 15 or 20 gold mines that didn't quite have as much gold in them as people thought. So what we want to do, and what we've tried to do with gold mines a lot of the time, is work out the real ones from the fake ones. And we have lots of ways to do that. We're pretty good at geology, but our favorite way is to follow bad people. You see, there are people out there who are geologists who will certify a gold mine has 1 million ounces when it really has 700,000 ounces. And they'll certify it has 1.7 grams per tonne when it's, which is a nicely economic, large, low-grade gold mine, when it really has 0.85 grams per tonne, which is a sub-economic, low-grade gold mine. So what we do is we seek bad people with gold mines and we short their gold mines. I'm going to have to throw up the next slide again. And the next slide just tells you it's not so easy. The all-time best mining fraudster in the world was a Canadian. I can tell you he was a complete and utter crook because he's dead. He can't sue me anymore. His name was Murray Pezham. Have we got the picture of Murray up? This is Murray with 3 of his beloved little girls. He was promoting a company which was completely ridiculous at the time. The company was called Simpatico, which allegedly sold wine to you based on your blood type. And every time he was promoting Simpatico, the rather scantily dressed Simpatico girls would turn up and promote the stock. And one of those strange things about men is that men do stupid things in the presence of pretty women, and those stupid things sometimes include buying bad shares. Murray was a really, really good scumbag. He did about 50 scumbag frauds over his life. And those frauds were ubiquitous. He did mining frauds, he did sports frauds, he did technology frauds, about 130 frauds. The only problem with Murray is that he actually found a gold mine once. The gold mine was called SK Creek, and we now know, and he's dead, so I can tell you the story, that he did the drill and he poured into the drill sample the usual about 0.7 of a gram per tonne, so just a little bit of gold dust into the drill sample, and sent it off to the lab expecting to find 0.7 gram a tonne of gold, which he could press release. And 0.7 gram a tonne is it's interesting, but it's not a gold mine. Nobody's ever going to go gold mining it. And lo and behold, it came back. And when it came back with, dare I say it, 1.16 grams per tonne. And so Murray Pezham, doing one of his normal stock frauds, found a fairly large gold mine. It's called SK Creek, and it was mined eventually by Rio Tinto. And if you do what we do, which is short bad people, every now and again you're going to find an SK Creek. So the revised goal here isn't to, find just the bad gold miners. The revised goal is find the bad gold miners, but don't short SK Creek. Anyway, Pretium Gold Mine had associated with it a pretty ugly person. I'm not going to name the person because they're alive and they're English and they'll sue me with this. But that person, to the best of our knowledge, has never been involved in a gold mine that turned out to be real. And he's been involved in about a dozen gold mines. So we get very excited when we find this person around because you usually can short it. Now, the problem, of course, is that if you short it, you might wind up with the next SK Creek. And we were ambivalent about Pretium. Is Pretium real? Is Pretium fake? The only real evidence that we had that it was fake was that it had this bad person with it. Alas, and I'm going to need to show you the next slide, we also had this lovely piece of evidence. This lovely piece of evidence is a picture of Bob Quartermain, the president. It's titled Viva el Pres, and it's a picture of Bob Quartermain, a young Bob Quartermain with Murray Pezim. Now, that was taken something like 20 years ago, and Murray Pezim is now dead, and Bob Quartermain now runs our Canadian mining company, Pretium. It's a pretty good sign. So we were pretty sure we were right, except for one nasty detail, and I'm going to have to show the next slide. The nasty detail was that it's the next slide, so you've got the right slide, is titled There's a Problem. The nasty detail was that there's a mining consultancy called Strathcona in Canada. And Strathcona is the mining consultancy you hire when you're being honest. I have never in my life known Strathcona to certify a bad gold mine. They were actually the mining consultancy that exposed 3X, which was the biggest gold mining fraud in history. And so when Pretium hired Strathcona, we thought, well, you know, Pretium's just not a good short. I mean, this is like hiring the Pope to tell you you're a good Catholic. If he'll do it, you're probably a good Catholic. And also Pretium sent out these beautiful pictures, and the picture here in the presentation has a sort of white volcanic rock interlaced with big layers of nice shiny gold. And, you know, a combination of bad person, Bob Quartermain, who's an old friend of Murray Pezim, but Strathcona and pictures of real gold, we ain't going to be shorted. And so this was a company that we had on the back burner. We kept looking at every now and again. It had about $1.5 billion, almost $2 billion market cap. It was an interesting company. But we weren't going to go long it because there were bad people associated with it, even though it had a very large gold deposit. And we weren't going to go short it because it had very good people associated with it, Strathcona. So we just left it. And then they put out a bombshell press release, and you're going to have to show this bombshell press release because I'm going to read it. The bombshell press release told us that there was a lot of gold in a bulk sample. They sent 2,000 tons of rock off to be crushed. And in that 2,000 tons of rock, they found, you know, hundreds of ounces of gold. In fact, I think they found something like 1,000 ounces of gold. But at the bottom of the press release was this wonderful line that Strathcona had resigned. And Strathcona in their resignation note said, and I'm going to read this to you, there are no valid gold mineral resources for the VOK zone. And without mineral resources, there can be no mineral reserves. And without mineral reserves, there can be no basis for the feasibility study. They also advised that statements included in all recent press releases by Pretium about probable mineral reserves and future gold production from the Valley of Kings zone over a 22-year mine life are erroneous and misleading. In other words, this company had hired the Pope to tell them they were good Catholics, and the Pope had come out and told them they were frauds. Now, what do you think the stock did that day? It halved. It was pretty obvious it was going to halve. And then I put on the most stupid trade I have put on in the last 10 years. It was unbelievably dumb. The trade was that I shorted some Pretium. Now, it seems a reasonable trade, right? Because we've been told by the Pope that this is a fraud. And we've already got bad people associated with it. Now we've got no good people associated with it. It's almost certain the gold's not there, or so we thought. But the reason it's a bad trade is obvious. Let's imagine the gold is really there. Then I've just shorted a stock that's halved that has a huge gold mine. Okay, that's a dumb idea. Now let's imagine the gold is not there. Now all you've got is liars. The only good guy, who's Farquharson from Strathcona, has resigned. And everybody else left is associated with the bad person. So they've now told you that they've got, you know, a large amount of gold, and they're liars. What are they going to tell you next? They've got even more gold, right? So either way, the stock's going up. It's going up because the gold really is there, or it's going up because they're going to tell you even more gold is there. This was the dumbest trade I have ever done. I cannot believe I was so stupid. And you really do need the next press release, which I titled, the next line, which I've titled, Pretium 1, Short Seller 0. Eventually, they milled 10,300 tons of rock. And in that 10,300 tons of rock, they found 5,865 ounces of gold and 4,950 ounces of silver. That is about $7 million worth of precious metal. Now, people have been sold in gold mines since the days of Mark Twain. I mean, a gold mine is a hole in the ground with a liar on it. The way they used to do it in the days of Mark Twain was they would take the lead shot out of a shotgun and put gold nuggets in it. And then they would fire the gold nuggets into the rock, and it looked like the gold was embedded in the rock, and then they'd sell the gold mine for a large amount of money, but there was only a little bit of gold in it, all placed there. And I've heard of salting a gold mine with 1 ounce or 2 ounces of gold. I've heard of pouring a little bit of gold dust worth $50 into a drill sample. But the idea that someone was going to pour $7 million worth of gold into the bulk sample in order to fake their gold mine was just a little bit implausible. So I was pretty sure that the gold was there. But I'm a cynical bastard. Right? I'm the sort of guy that will pretend I've got gonorrhea to prove somebody's a fraud. And in this case, I asked myself a question, which is, who has really seen this gold? After all, there's a press release that says there's $7 million of gold in this bulk sample, but I didn't see it, and you didn't see it. And I'm sure the company sold it by now, so they can't demonstrate it. And besides, how do you know it was there? So I went and looked at the press release very carefully, and I put up the key thing, which is who has seen the gold. And at the bottom of that press release is written, preliminary mill results are provided by Strategic Minerals, LLC. Now, I've never heard of Strategic Minerals, LLC, and I suspect that nobody in the room where you are has ever heard of Strategic Minerals, LLC. In fact, as far as I could tell, Strategic Minerals, LLC didn't exist. We discovered that it was registered in a Las Vegas lawyer's office. And it was owned by a company called Western Minerals, LLC, that had been registered 4 days earlier in a Las Vegas lawyer's office. Western Resource Ventures had stopped paying its registration fees. It was delinquent on its accounts. Strategic Minerals, LLC had never filed a set of accounts. There was no other reference whatsoever to Strategic Minerals, LLC, and we were wildly stuck. We had absolutely no idea how we would track down Strategic Minerals. But it seemed pretty key to this short because they are claiming a massive gold mine, and this massive gold mine is certified by somebody called Strategic Minerals, LLC, and for the life of us, we can't find who they are. Eventually, one of my staff members had a really brilliant idea. It turns out that in the US, there is a database called the Mine Health and Safety Administration database. And in that database, you have to register every mining operation and every milling operation, and you have to report every injury. So we went to the Mine Health and Safety database, and I put a slide up saying US government data for the record, and I want to throw that slide up. In that slide, it says the current contractor is Sima Murov, and he had been the contractor since the 30th of September 2013. Now, it's kind of interesting that he'd been the contractor since 30 September 2013 because that was 1 week before the milling started. So we know this guy called Sima Murov had got hold of a mill in Montana 1 week before the milling for this gold mine started. And he'd registered a company called Strategic Minerals, LLC, and he was certifying the gold was there. We still, of course, hadn't seen the gold. The town is in Phillipsburg, Montana, which has a population of 820, and it's utterly the middle of nowhere. Now, the question was, who was Simimurov? I want the first slide on who was Simimurov. He was easy to find. We've got a picture of him here. He's wearing dark sunglasses and a white shirt. And we got another picture of him here, which is his mugshot from a previous fraud arrest. So by this stage, we're pretty sure we know who Simimurov is. Simimurov's a pretty bad guy. And now we're starting to get the taste of a really, really good short hit piece. You know, we're figuring we can go public on this and we can, you know, drive this stock down 75, 80%. It turns out that Simimurov also has a business called ISR Capital. And ISR Capital is a visa mill. In the US, if you invest a certain amount of money in the US, you can qualify for an EB-5 visa. And an EB-5 visa is essentially a visa for rich people who invest a certain amount of money in the US. And Simimurov invented projects for rich people, largely Chinese rich people, to invest large amounts of money in the US. And of course, the money disappeared. It went into Simimurov's pocket, right? But the rich Chinese people would fly to Montana, and I have this lovely picture of a whole lot of rich Chinese people in a gold mill with a big lump of gold in front of them. We wonder if this is the gold mill, the gold that was refined at Pretium. We can't prove it or disprove it. But nonetheless, you've got the Chinese rich guys with the hard hats that they can't quite put on right. Now, it turns out that Simimurov's EB-5 business has to be registered with various government officials. So we went and subpoenaed. We went and asked under a freedom of information for every one of his registration statements. And we discovered that he actually hadn't registered for 5 years, which means that he wasn't legally allowed to sell EB-5 visas. So he was selling Chinese people gold mines in Montana and never actually getting them the visa, right? This is a pretty nasty sort of guy. That said, now we knew the mill in Montana. We went and got, believe it or not, from the Montana local authorities, the sketch plans for the mills. I want to put it up. The simple question, does the mill have the right equipment to mill the Pretium gold? And strangely, the answer was yes. In other words, we would have really loved to prove that this mill was a 50-year-old mill that didn't work and didn't have the right equipment. But in fact, unfortunately, it was a working mill and it did have the right equipment. And we did have some pictures of some Chinese people there with gold. So maybe it was real, but, you know, it's a pretty interesting scenario. And then there's the second problem, which is, where is Phillipsburg, Montana? Well, I put a map up here. And it turns out that Phillipsburg, Montana is an awful long way from the Pretium gold mine. Google says it's 26 hours driving. It's almost all the way across British Columbia and into Alberta, and then all the way, half the way through Montana. It's in fact the same distance as Dallas to Los Angeles. And this is kind of weird because they milled 10,000 tons of gold. Now, 10,000 tons is about 500 semi-trailer loads full of gold. And the idea of moving 500 semi-trailer loads full of rock 10,000 kilometres was sort of absurd to us. We just didn't think it could possibly be done. So this was basically our thesis, our thesis was that they didn't move the rock. Right? After all, you know, nobody saw the gold. Simimurov wasn't there. The idea that they picked a mill 26 hours driving away, I mean, that's sort of like London to Moscow away. Right? It's just kind of absurd. So we have this sort of working thesis that they didn't move the rock. And we started by looking at the railway lines. And it turns out that there's a railway line that goes within a reasonable distance of Phillipsburg, Montana. It's a Class 2 railway line. And we rang up the railway line and asked, did they move the rock? And the answer came back that they'd ripped the railway line up 5 years ago. So it's pretty clear that they hadn't moved the rock. We also went and looked and thought, well, did they load rail cars? We talked to all the railway companies and none of them would confirm that they'd moved the rock. The nearest town to the mine is the town of Terrace, British Columbia. It's 200 kilometres from the mine site. We rang the Chamber of Commerce and asked them, where would you load material in Terrace, British Columbia? And they gave us the names of the various transloading people. So we rang up every trucking and trail loading company in Terrace, British Columbia, and all of them assured that they had never loaded the rock. Moreover, there's another listed gold company called Seabridge Gold, which is also an interesting short thing. And Seabridge Gold has a mining area somewhere near Pretium. And in its feasibility report, it reads that there are no facilities for loading the rock anywhere near Terrace or any other locations, and that these would need to be developed, and that the loading facilities would cost $3 million to develop and would take at least 12 months. So given that the Terrace Chamber of Commerce said there were no loading facilities and Seabridge Gold said there were no loading facilities, we figured there must be no loading facilities. We also decided we were going to check about trucks. And it turns out all the way through northern Canada are little road sensors. And these road sensors tell you what sort of trucks went through and they can even tell you what speed because they have double road sensors so they know how fast the truck was going. And we know the traffic data for every road in northern British Columbia. Believe it or not, these road sensors are connected to the internet. So you can actually, from Australia, work out the traffic data in northern British Columbia, which we went and did. And it turned out that there were about 2,500 vehicles, and as they going each direction, and as they only needed about 500 trucks, we figured that that was actually plausible. We couldn't prove that the trucks had never gone through. So it's still possible that they moved the rock, but we were getting rather concerned about this. The other thing is that we went and got the traffic data from last year and the year before, and the traffic data was about 200 higher. We would have preferred it to be 500 higher because 500 higher would give you 500 semi-trailers, but it was 200 higher. It wasn't low enough to dismiss the idea that they'd moved the rock, but it wasn't high enough to prove that they'd moved the rock. There's also a bridge they would have to cross, and the bridge actually has an engineering problem. And we were trying to work out whether the bridge could carry these semis full of rock. And we even went to the point of getting the engineering report. And yes, unfortunately, it had 68 tonnes and the semis were going to weigh 30 tonnes. So unfortunately, we couldn't dismiss the possibility that the rock had moved by over the bridges. We then went to the US border guards. And it turns out that in the US, you have to declare any gold or gold-bearing rock or precious mineral-bearing rock that travels across the border. And we went and with FOI, we went and got the declaration for every single border point from Vancouver all the way across to the Great Lakes. We didn't get the last one at the Great Lakes, right? But in order to get to the Great Lakes, you have to go all the way across the United States and all the way back again. We're starting to move rock from, say, Paris to Addis Ababa, right? Some ridiculous distance. And so we didn't bother with them. And it turns out that no rock had been declared for 6 months with any gold in it going over the border. So either they didn't move the rock or they didn't declare it. We thought this was pretty good evidence, right? And so we were pretty well preparing to go public. We had the bad person, the Strathcona resignation. We had Simamura. We had no declaration in any border guard that they had moved. So they hadn't declared to the US Customs that they had moved rock over the border. This is looking like a pretty comprehensive case. What we didn't have was we couldn't prove that they didn't move the trucks. We couldn't prove but we could prove that there were no loading facilities in either Terrace, British Columbia, or Prince Rupert Sound, which are the only towns, and they're like 400 kilometres apart. I mean, this is the middle of nowhere, but we could prove there were no loading facilities there, and we could prove the rock wasn't loaded on trains. We could prove that any border point hadn't gone through the border because that would have been declared and noticed. So we're pretty sure to go public. Then Pretium Interest produced an updated report which discussed all their milling and how they were going to do it. And in their updated report, they said very specifically that the ore was moved by rail in super sacks from Terrace, British Columbia, where it couldn't be loaded, to the port of Montana, an inland rail port in Silver Bow, Montana. But the railways had told us that there was nowhere to load ore in Terrace. So we decided we'd better be double sure. And what we did was we got out Google Earth and we followed for 400 kilometres the railway line. And what we were looking for was any split on the railway line where there could be a loading facility, because, you know, we just wanted to double check that they hadn't loaded. And it turns out there was a split. The split is a kind of an odd split. It's at a First Nations tribal village. It's called the Kitsakalem First Nations. And the Kitsakalem First Nations have a gravel mine, which they load, and the gravel gets used for railway maintenance. And you can actually get on the Kitsakalem First Nations site pictures of their gravel mining facility and all their loading facilities. And it turns out there's no obvious siding to load super sacks of gold rock. You know, these are 1-ton sacks. There's only a mechanism for loading gravel, which is a conveyor belt that drops the gravel into the top of a sort of gondola train. So we were still puzzled, could they possibly have done it? But we rang up the Kitsakalem First Nations just for kicks. And we were told that, yeah, the supervisor of the loading dock would happily talk to us. But he wasn't there that day. So we rang him up the next day. And on the second day, he still wasn't there. And on the third day, we rang him up and he wasn't there again. And unfortunately, on the sixth day, and it's biblical because he finished the entire thing, we rang him up and he said, oh, yeah, I loaded all that. He named the company. He told us how the super sacks were loaded. He said it was a real pain in the arse of a job because he didn't have the right equipment. So he had to build certain equipment and it took him weeks to do the loading. And then he sent us photos of him loading the rock. And so here we are with this amazing short case about how they never moved the rock to Montana, how Simamurov is a crook, how everything. And it falls apart. And it falls apart because we have the temerity to talk to an Indian tribe. Now, the last slide I want to show you, the last slide is just an award for the most officious bureaucratic official we've ever met. He's the customs officer who we actually had to threaten with court before he would tell us about the amounts of rock that had travelled over the US border. No thanks to him, but thanks to everyone else involved. I'm happy to take questions.
Do you do it all in-house or do you outsource any?
We do both. I've hired people in China. This one we did entirely in-house. Right? It could all be done over the phone. Things like the internet sensors, the FOI requests, all of that can be done via the internet. Sometimes we need to spy. There are some countries where it's legal to film from a drone. There are some countries where it's not. Where it's legal to film from a drone, we can get legally obtained evidence by flying a drone over a mine site, for instance. We've done it. In those cases, we've hired somebody who's a professional drone pilot who knows how to do it, because we don't have the requisite drone. I've myself gone around photographing factories in China, and the sort of instructions, you go with a blank computer. If you photograph factories in China, there's a good chance you're going to get arrested. But they don't actually arrest you at the factory, they arrest you at the hotel. And the process is that every hotel in China is obliged about 9:30 to tell the central authorities which Westerners are staying there. So as long as you check in after 9:30, you tend not to get arrested. It's one of those lovely tricks. But we've also hired external people. We've hired people in China to walk around factories, to spy on people. I have friends that have gone to the point of hiring an apartment building in China so that they can film out of the apartment building window a factory for 3 months on slow-mo. We do quite a lot of work. But I mean, the really charming ones are the ones that you can do without leaving your desk. I mean, I did Cupid without leaving my desk. I mean, I invented the guy with gonorrhea. And if I wish to complete that story, not only did he have gonorrhea, it gave him a non-competent rectal valve. Yeah, it infected both his urinary and rectal passages. It gave him a non-competent rectal valve, which leaked a mixture of pus and fecal matter, and that accounted for his smell. Now, you can do that without leaving your desk. I proved Cupid was a fraud comprehensively without leaving my desk. Right? The really fun ones are the ones that you can do without leaving your desk.
Okay, thanks a lot. You mentioned Seabridge as an interesting short. Could you expand upon that?
Yeah, okay. There is a gold mine in Western... Oh, let's crank back to some very basic things. There are gold mines in West Australia that have gold grades of 1 gram per tonne, but there are virtually no gold grades of 2 grams per tonne. And the reason there are no gold grades of 2 grams per tonne is that the gold deposits have been known about for a century. And eventually what happens is that, 100 years ago, the Chinese immigrants would come and they would work like slaves. And they would put an entire mountain through a hill for 2 grams per tonne, but they wouldn't put it through 1 gram per tonne. It turns out that all around the world, 1 gram per tonne is a sort of iconic grade for a low-grade gold deposit. And the reason is that the stuff above 1 gram per tonne was got a long time ago. Now, there's two big gold deposits in Australia that are 1 gram per tonne gold deposits. They're called Boddington in West Australia, which is owned by Newmont. It's the main asset in Newmont. And the other one is Cadia. On the web, you will find a video of Boddington Gold and how they produced it. And it's an enormous project. And it costs $3.6 billion to build, and it mills about 100,000 tonnes of rock per day. You can do the calculations off the video. So it costs about $3,600 worth of capital to produce equipment that will crush and mill about a tonne of rock a day. Now, we can run that through, and that runs at about 0.95 grams per tonne, and we know the economics. The grades at Seabridge are lower than 0.95 grams per tonne, but if you look at their capital expenditure, it's one per ounce of gold they're going to mine. It's about 1/5 the capital expenditure of Boddington. So I'm not sure I believe, in fact, I'm sure I don't believe the CapEx numbers of Seabridge. Right? Seabridge claims to have a lot of gold. I don't know whether they do or don't, but they also claim to have a process for mining it, which is wildly more efficient than the biggest low-grade gold mines in the world, and that seems unlikely.
Have you got another question? Oh, I'm going to come to you over here.
Hi, are there any further thoughts on Valiant and where it goes to?
There are lots of further thoughts on Valiant. 2 of the businesses of Valiant, and only one of which I've exposed so far, are completely dependent on captive pharmacies that rip off insurance companies. For people that don't know, and Valiant is a very big story in the US and not a big story in the UK, Valiant is a roll-up of pharmaceutical companies that sells a bunch of relatively commodity drugs with brand names. I'll give you an example. They sell a drug called Solidin, which is in fact minocycline, just an ordinary antibiotic, but it's branded, it's put in an extended release package, it's meant to treat acne, and they sell it for $1,000 for 30 pills, where there is a $15 generic. And the question is, why the hell would anyone pay $1,000 for minocycline when you can buy a generic for $15? And the answer is, well, they're not paying, an insurance company is paying. And then the question is, well, why would an insurance company pay? Why wouldn't the insurance company insist on substituted generic? And the way the insurance company insists on a substitutive generic is it insists that you pay a $100 copay and you have a doctor that insists that you're not allowed to substitute the generic, and then we'll cover the rest. But otherwise, you can go buy the generic. Now, Valiant set up fake pharmacies. I published a list of 70 fake pharmacies it set up, but I think the true number is about 300. And what would happen is you would go to a pharmacy that they controlled. That pharmacy was called Philidor. They never disclosed that they owned Philidor, and they still deny they owned Philidor. That pharmacy would write "dispensers written" on the script. And that means the doctor doesn't allow you to substitute. It would then waive the $100 copay, but tell the drug company it had collected the $100 copay. And then rather than put it through the name of Philidor, they would put it through the name of one of the 70 fake pharmacies I've identified, so that not all of these scripts came from one place. In fact, they may have set up fake pharmacies at will in order to deceive insurance companies. Now, Philidor was only 7% of the revenue of Valiant, but it was probably 10% in the last quarter. There's another set of fake pharmacies associated with their neurology division, and I'm going to leave you the puzzle of trying to work out what they are, and that's another 10% of the revenue. My guess is the revenue has to fall about 15%. I do the maths, and I don't think they can meet their debt covenants. I think it's a zero. But the number that the revenue falls now is uncertain, but that's the story at the moment.
John, it's tremendously interesting, and you've given us a fantastic exposition of a range of industries. How many people do you have working for you, and how big is your fund? I mean, is it realistic for a private investor to do anything like this?
There are a bunch of yeses and nos. I have about 5 full-time staff working for me. I have a bunch of private investors who I actually share research tasks with. So the network is more like 10 or 15. It is realistic for private investors to do things like this. I know a few that do. I'm going to be blunt about it. The number of people that do and do successfully, I think, can be counted on your hands. And that's in a global market. I mean, Gowex, which is the big Spanish fraud that was exposed recently, was exposed by one of my very close friends. He operates under the name of Gotham, but everybody knows who he was. When I met Daniel, right, he was a private investor, and he'd been a private investor doing this sort of thing quietly for a while, and admittedly he got rather good at it, and Gowex was a rather big hit. But the answer to that is, unless you're prepared to be a full-time investor, it's not realistic.
So how would we invest in your fund?
The answer to that is send me an email and I will send it on to Simon. There are compliance issues I've decided a long time ago that I'm never going to answer that question. I will give it to my back office to answer. But we're happy for people to do so.
Have we got any more questions in the audience? There we go. I'm coming over to you then. I'll come to you in a moment. I'm going to this chap, making and being decisive. So thanks though for that guidance.
Thanks. Hi John, thanks for your talk, and it's good to see you smiling throughout as you tell your story. You obviously enjoy your work. My question is, do you find it better to be early to a short position, or would you join something perhaps later on when you're surer?
That depends how much it goes up. I assure you, early can be wrong. There is a fund in California that I won't name that almost destroyed itself by being early to a short position. The company called Lernout and Houseby, which the Europeans might remember, it was the biggest fraud in the world in the dot-com era. It was a speech recognition software company. It claimed to the Holy Grail, and this was in the height of the tech boom. So in 1999, they claimed the Holy Grail of speech recognition, which is you walked into a room, you spoke into a giant wall full of flashing computers, and it would recognize your speech, put it into text. Then they put it through a rudimentary translation program and a rudimentary speaking program. And the object here was that you should be able to meet the Holy Grail of speech recognition, which is you talk into a phone in one language and talk out during it, and it will come out in another language. This would be very useful in Europe. Now, the problem, this thing had Microsoft as an investor and Intel as investor. So it's pretty unlikely to be a fraud. After all, fooling Microsoft and Intel on a tech stock is hard. It turns out that it was a complete fraud, and it was done with a man behind the curtain typing. It was the full-blown Wizard of Oz. And it had a market cap at peak of about $30 billion. Right? It makes GoWex look like a small fraud. Now, this fund in California was 6% short Lernout and Houseby on 1 January 2000. It's a $10 stock. By October, it was a 1-cent stock. This sounds like a fantastic short, except the problem was that it went via $65. And if you're 6% of your wealth short Lernout and Houseby at $10, you're 36 short at $60, except that your wealth has gone from 100 to 70. So you're 36 on 70, which means you're 50% short Lernout and Houseby at $60. And that means your broker is going to put you out of business. So you could go bust being right, just being early. You can't go bust being right, being late. Now, Lernout and Houseby was wonderful because I didn't find it till after the peak. In which case, I shorted it and it was just straight money. I'd rather be late than early.
Hi, John. I read your blog. I'd like to thank you for writing that. It's a wonderful read. I've had many disasters on shorting. Although it can seem certain that a company is a fraud, the promoters can push it up many times over. Have you got any advice on timing that so I don't get burnt by an unlimited upside?
I have limited advice on that. Here's what we do normally. We have a database of scumbags. That database contains about 1,000 people. The problem with shorting a fraudulent gold mine, imagine you've got 2 gold mines, one real, one fake. Both claim to have 1 million ounces. Both claim to have a plan to mine that mine in the next from 2 years to 7 years. Both have a market cap of, say, $200 million. Which one's going to be the 10-bagger, the real one or the fake one? Well, it's guaranteed to be the fake one. Now, the reason why it's the fake one, the real one is run by a guy who spent the last 20 years of his life driving a 4-wheel drive around the middle of nowhere, usually somewhere horribly hot like Australia or horribly cold like Canada. And he scratched rocks and this is his life's work. He may be to the right of Genghis Khan, but if he wanted to marry your daughter, you'd be thrilled. He's a really good guy. And his life's work is to turn that gold into money. The other gold mine is run by a scumbag. He really has, sitting out there in the side that you can't see, 60% of the stock held by undisclosed related parties. He has nothing else. His only job is to sell it. So what's he going to do? He's going to make the gold mine bigger. If he's lied about 1 million ounces, the next thing he's going to do is lie about 5 million or 10 million ounces. So the fraudulent one's a 10-bagger. We have a solution to this, and it's a solution that's not very nice. The solution is the better the fraud, the smaller the position. So when you find one that's absolutely guaranteed to go to zero, put 30 basis points on. You're going to make your 30 basis points, and you're not going to get whipsawed. Now, the problem is if you're going to do it that way, you've got a problem, which is that you can only make 30 basis points. And, you know, I don't do all this work to make 30 basis points. So the answer we have is just diversify your scumbags. We have a computer that will track about 1,000 of them. I guarantee you that there are a few in the room next door to this conference trying to sell you shares. I hope they do. Right? But if you diversify your scumbag, then you can solve that problem. There are other ways of solving it. One way of solving it is the hit things, right? Just get a big position and go public. Right? Another way of solving it is the really, really, really good ones have debt maturity. You interfere with the debt rollover. We've also played the game of interfering with the audit. But as a general rule, shorting frauds in large quantity is a way of going broke.